The tourist information for the Spielberg area of Austria talks about fantastic scenery and the beautiful landscaping. It doesn't tell you that if you come and watch motor racing here today, you'll end up wetter than a mermaid's flannel because the weather has been horrendous all morning. The Formula 3 race 3 of the weekend is round 24 of the championship. It has been delayed a couple of hours because of the weather, and even now, although the cars are making their way to the grid, the rain is falling once more. We've just had DTM qualifying that began on a wet road, but the rain came towards the end, and so it's going to be a safety car start. And how many laps we get in before we can go racing, if we can go racing, remains to be seen. But the race director, Sven Stopper, has done his best to try and give them better conditions by delaying the race, and things are better than they were at the allotted time slot early on when the rain was bouncing off the road. The hardy fans have stayed. They finally got some track activity. Yesterday's two races were run in absolutely gorgeous weather conditions, it's got to be said, but a real contrast today. Round 24 of the championship then to get underway very shortly. Wins this weekend. Jake Dennis in race 1, Felix Rosenqvist in race 2. And we are 10 minutes or so away from the race getting underway. David Addison with you from the Red Bull Ring, looking down onto the grid. No argument about tyres. Wet Hancooks for everybody. And the bedraggled teams then, who've already had one trip to the pits and back to the paddock, are now on track. Umbrellas to try and keep the drivers a little bit free of the rain before they are released, but they're going to spend the bulk of this race just sitting in spray, I fear. Now, earlier on in the day, we had the Audi Sport TT Cup support race that began under a safety car. We had effectively 4 laps of safety car, and halfway up the hill to turn 2 on the first proper racing lap, there was a big accident as people hit standing water and went off the road, and that stopped it, and it was not restarted. I mention that because, for the race director's point of view, it's very difficult to know exactly when the optimum time is to let them go, because if you run behind the safety car because the weather conditions are bad and it keeps on raining, then your standing water is going to get no better, is it? Set up to Antonio Giovinazzi's car being adjusted there on pole position to make it better for the soaking wet conditions that we now have. They've had the opportunity to go through the pit lane and therefore get an extra installation lap round onto the grid. And Antonio Giovinazzi, with a third and a second to his name thus far this weekend, is the man on pole position. Antonio was a winner here last year, and he comes into this race as the championship leader. He carries 321 points to the 304 of Felix Rosenqvist, and it is Rosenqvist there with him at the front of the grid. Felix was second in race 1 behind his teammate Jake Dennis, although he started that from pole position. Didn't make the best of starts relative to Jake, and therefore he dropped back, but he won convincingly yesterday's second race. And so he's getting closer to Antonio Giovinazzi in the championship. And he, of course, wants this race to go the distance, and he wants it to be a proper race, because if it only gets to 75% behind a safety car, for example, it will be half points, and that doesn't help him at all in the championship. Sergio Sette Camara is on the 3rd rank on the grid, his best qualifying of the season. This grid based on a driver's second best qualifying time from the second session on Friday afternoon, which in itself was interrupted when Julio Moreno went off the road and plonked his car in the gravel. But Sergio Sette Camara, with a 9th and a 19th out of the 2 races so far this weekend, lines up then 3rd on the grid. Has another look at the track map, and we'll also be mindful now of where the standing water is. And therefore 4th is Marcus Pommer, who's made 2 duff starts this weekend, but both times he was on the other side of the grid. So fingers crossed he'll get away smartish for this one. He was a winner at Zandvoort last time out, and a 17th and a 6th of the 2 results that Marcus has coming in to race 3 of the weekend. He drives for the Motopark team, whereas for Prema, next on the grid is Lance Stroll, 4th in race 1, 3rd in race 2, the first time he'd been on the podium as an overall finisher rather than the winning rookie. And Lance Stroll has gone pretty well around here this weekend. It's good that the pace is there, because his reputation was becoming that for his incidents at Monza and Spa. But actually, he has done a good job this weekend. And the Canadian driver, part of the Ferrari Young Driver Academy, going well. A 4th and a 3rd. Can he continue to advance up the order? Next on the grid is the man that did lead the championship heading to Zandvoort, but Charles Leclerc now finds himself only 3rd. He's had 4 race wins, but the Monegasque driver needs to get some points out of this. But not only that, he needs to be ahead of Rosenqvist and Giovinazzi. Ideally, he'd like them to go off the road, but perhaps is being a little bit unfair, but he needs to be ahead of them, and they're so far up the road that overtaking them is not going to be easy. He needs them to have some sort of a drama and drop down the field. Jake Dennis was the winner of race 1, but on old tyres, he was only 8th in the second race. Jake now having had 5 race wins to the 7 of Felix Rosenqvist. They're the 2 top scorers in terms of the win rate. And then lining up 8th is Alex Albon, 6th in the championship now. Alex, who's getting better and better. His season's getting better and better as he becomes more experienced. And Signature, one of the top F3 teams of years past, back in the championship this year, and positive strides being taken. So Alex Albon looking as though he could be a man to watch, but these conditions, it really is a lottery. 9th on the grid is where you find Silverstone winner George Russell, last year's BRDC F4 champion, and he's got a 5th and a 7th out of the weekend so far. Alex Albon a 7th and a 5th, Charles Leclerc a 6th and a 4th, just to go back to those drivers and their respective results. George Russell for Carlin, whose fleet of cars are all in different colour schemes, because you've got the traditional Carlin colours for George, you've got the Red Bull livery here for Carlin's Callum Ilott, who lines up 10th on the grid. He had to pit for a new front nose in the first race, so he dropped to 30th, but 12th, frustratingly still out of the points in race 2 yesterday. Callum Ilott, first season of Formula 3, first year of car racing, but going strongly nonetheless as he lines up 10th on the grid. And then 11th is Santino Ferrucci, 12th and 13th, his 2 results thus far. And the American teenager, who has been on the podium, he lucked into a podium at Spa as others had dramas ahead of him, so he could well be a driver to watch in this race and see what progress can be made, because keeping out of trouble is half the battle across this 35-minute 24-lap race, and I suspect that it will be time rather than laps, especially given that it's going to have to be a safety car start. Looking down on the grid is the ever-brave Gustavo Menezes, 12th he is, and 8th and 10th, both point-scoring results for Gustavo over the course of the weekend so far. And the Carlin driver set to go. Engineers start to clear the grid at the 1-minute board, of course. The engine is fired up, and then the last engineer will make their way back to the pit lane. There is 27, Mikkel Jensen, 10th and 9th, his 2 race results thus far this weekend. For Muka Motorsport, the Mercedes-engined Dallara. And Mikkel Jensen lining up behind Muka teammate Santino Ferrucci. Michael Douglas here as a guest of the Stroll family this weekend, and understanding how bad these weather conditions are as he looks out at the grim track conditions ahead of the drivers, but having arrived of late with a break in the cloud to be able to land his helicopter. So Michael Douglas and Catherine Zeta-Jones is here somewhere as well. I think Susie Wolf in the background there, very much the VIP balcony, and in the beige jacket, Hans-Werner Aufrecht, the chairman of the ITR board. Christoph Hever there as well, who is the man who looks after the FIA Formula 3 European Championship. Raoul Hyman is on the grid too. He is 14th, a brace of 11th places. Mega frustration that, because both occasions you miss out on the points by 1 place. But Raoul Hyman has acquitted himself well, I would suggest, this year in his first year of Formula 3. Sam McLeod there is 15th on the grid, 18th and 29th Sam's results, but he can be a feisty racer. And Sam, moving from the German Championship with Motorpark to this series this year, best finish has been a 9th place. Could be one to watch, but as I say, keeping out of trouble is half the battle. Overtaking will not be easy because of the spray, but if people do start to have dramas and slither off the road and leave the door open, that will help you if you can capitalise. But it's going to be a safety car start, we understand. The safety car has been deployed, and Antonio Giovinazzi is the man at the front of the grid. So the 1-minute board now is shown, and the engines fire up. Just looking down onto the grid, there was, for the 2 races yesterday, Ryan Tvita starting from the pit lane, and that will happen again. Ryan Tvita didn't take part in qualifying because of an off in the first practice session, and he spun at turn 1, did a lot of damage as the chassis went over the sausage curb to the under tray and the bulkhead of the car. And a lot of work had to be done by Carlin, not only to rebuild the car, but also to persuade everybody to let him into the race itself. And so the stewards have said, yes, Ryan Tvita can race, but he has to start from the pit lane. So actually, this probably won't do him too much harm, because he'll be able to join the queue under a safety car start coming out of turn 1. And by being at the back when we go racing, it may well be that he can have all the incidents ahead of him and he can gain some places. How many laps it will be behind the safety car, we'll just have to wait and see. As I say, the rain is abating a little now, in fairness, but it's still pretty horrible out there. The track is wet, and the race is on. The cars leave the grid behind the safety car, and so it is a safety car start, and therefore round 24 of the championship is underway, because all of these laps count. This time counts within the 35 minutes, so a safety car start, and the field now makes its way uphill towards turn 1. No overtaking permitted behind the safety car, unless, of course, somebody has a problem ahead of you and slithers off the road, in which case you've got no real option but to pass. But everybody has to stay in the single file formation. And then, in consultation with the officials in the safety car, Sven Stopper, the race director, has to make the decision as to when and if to let them go. Now, this is the run up towards turn 2, which yesterday was the scene in the dry of plenty of incident, because you are arriving absolutely flat. There is Rd8 ready to go, but rather late on parade, he goes down the pit lane, makes his way uphill to join the back of the queue, but by doing that, of course, he's keeping out of the spray. So uphill from turn 2, tricky, slow corner. This is how the grid, had it been a grid start, would have looked. It's how the race order looks now, with Antonio Giovinazzi leading Felix Rosenqvist, then Sergio Sette Camara third, ahead of Marcus Pommer and Lance Stroll. Charles Leclerc, Jake Dennis, Alex Albon, George Russell and Callum Ilott round out the top 10 on the grid, ahead of Santino Ferrucci. Then there is Gustavo Menezes. Mikkel Jensen comes next. Then it is Raul Hyman, ahead of Sam McLeod, Tatiana Calderon, Dorian Boccolacci, Max Gunter a long way back on the grid, ahead of Michele Beretta, Alessio Lorandi, Nabil Jeffrey, Kang Ling. Then it is Arjun Maini, ahead of Andy Chang, and the rest of the field turning their way through, with Pietro Fittipaldi, Matt Solomon, Matt Rao, Fabian Schiller, Matthias Leist, Peter Lee, Mahavir Raghunathan and Julio Moreno rounding out the notional grid starters. But then, as I say, you've got Rd8 now joining in from the pit lane. So the field behind the safety car follows in order, with Antonio Giovinazzi then, the championship leader, the man from Martina Franca in Italy. Having spent his early days racing in karting, he was the winner in 2012 of the Chinese Formula Pilota series, out of which quite a few very talented drivers have come. It's a rather underrated championship, that. He then moved into British Formula 3 and was the runner-up in 2013 and was 17th in the European Championship. He was 6th in this series last year. Felix Rosenqvist, who is the man second in the queue, very much a Formula 3 veteran these days, because he came into the forerunner of this series, the F3 Euro series, back in 2011. Twice a winner of the Formula 3 Masters. He won in Macau last year. He was 8th in the championship, this championship last season, having begun in karting, then in the Asian Formula Renault environment. And there's one car, Kang Ling, who's just come down the pit lane. Now, why that is, there he is. Doesn't look like there's any damage, but if it's water in the works, that might need sorting out. So Kang Ling into the pit lane. Felix Rosenqvist third in the FIA Formula 3 European Championship in 2012. He was second in 2013, but it all went wrong last year. As I say, it was a bad year with Mucca. Won in Po, but was precious short of success last year, but is now second in the championship this year. The next man on the grid, Sergio Sette Camara, in his first year in the FIA Formula 3 European Championship, and he's a driver that has raced in not just karts, but also in the Brazilian Formula 3 Championship. He had, in fairness, a couple of outings last year, but concentrated mainly on the Brazilian Championship. He drove in the Toyota Racing Series in New Zealand at the start of this year and acquitted himself pretty well. And then you got Marcus Pommer lining up fourth in the queue. An experienced driver, Marcus Pommer. As you look at Lance Stroll, he's fifth, but just to finish Marcus Pommer, karts, Formula BMW, Formula Masters, F3 from 2009 in the German Championship. He was the runner-up in the FIA Formula 2 category back in 2012 and winner of last year's German Championship and third in Auto GP last year. Lance Stroll was the man running behind him. From karts to Italian F4 and then the Toyota Racing Series at the start of this year, but first year for the Montreal-born driver in the FIA Formula 3 European Championship, and currently fifth in the queue, with Charles Leclerc next up. And Charles himself is in his rookie year, having led the championship early in the season. Indeed, he was a winner within the first meeting at Silverstone. But Charles Leclerc, only his second year of car racing, did quite a lot of single-seater racing last year, though. He drove in both the Formula Renault Alps and Formula Renault Euro Cup categories. But in terms of Formula 3 experience, it's all been about this year, and he knows that he needs to try and gain places if and when we go racing here. Now, if they follow the safety car indefinitely and get to 75%, a spin there for Julio Moreno, it'll be half points. if they can do more than 75%, it's obviously full points, and the frustration for the race director is knowing whether or not it's going to be safe to let them go, because if people are spinning even behind the safety car, then it does rather prove the point that track conditions are still horrible. That said, you can't have every race in the rain purely behind a safety car, can you? But for the moment, it's the standing water, I think, that's the issue more than anything else. But what could also be the game plan is to give the drivers 3 or 4 laps at slightly increasing speeds just to get more familiar with track conditions, and then let them go into the race as the marshals spot themselves on the big screens around the circuit. And they've worked overtime with these yellow flags across the races today. I tell you, we've had 2 safety cars in the Porsches at the start of the day, a safety car start and then a red flag and the race abandoned for the Audi TTs, and then DTM warm-up, red flagged and not continued. The DTM warm-up did happen, the DTM qualifying session rather did happen, and now Formula 3 delayed, safety car start, and still they parade behind the Audi. Field turning downhill out of turn 3 as Dorian Boccolacci in the signature car. In his first season in the championship, Dorian was the runner-up in last year's French Formula 4 series, and teammate to Alex Albon, who is 8th in the queue. Alex, another of the drivers that's moved from Formula Renault. Michael Douglas continues to watch on, sheltered from the rain, but at the moment he's not got much racing to watch. So the field currently is on lap 3 of a 24-lap, in quotes, race, as the field works its way now down towards the end of the lap itself into Rindt and then Red Bull Mobile Curve. The lights flash to remind all the drivers that they are behind the safety car, that it's yellow flag conditions, and up towards the timing line they will come, waiting for news, if at all, of when we might get a proper start to the race. Antonio Giovinazzi, of course, the man leading the field, keeping within the 10 lengths of the safety car, but lagging back a little bit so that he doesn't get too much spray in his face. And it's a flip side to the coin for being the race leader if and when we go racing, because on the one hand you haven't got the spray of a car ahead, but of course equally you're the pioneer on every lap. You're the one that's going to find where the wet patches are on the track. So the rain continues to fall. SZ1, incidentally, means the first of the slow zones that are put in for the DTM cars. Rather than having a virtual safety car, they have these slow zones, a bit like a sort of average speed check on the motorways in roadworks. As the cars come out of Remus, turn 2. And this, a very, very tricky corner because it's tight, it's slow, you're turning uphill, and just as you finish turning, you drop over the brow, and then the speed builds all the way downhill towards Rauch, turn 3. So, no news yet as to if and when the safety car may peel in. Championship situation after the 2 races we've had this weekend. Antonio Giovinazzi with this advantage now of 321 points. Felix Rosenqvist on 304. And then Charles Leclerc, he's dropped to 3rd, but he's still in touch, 300.5 with Jake Dennis there or thereabouts. He's 4th on 245. George Russell 5th on 162. Alex Albon 6th on 148 points now. And a red flag is being shown, and I fear that that's going to be the end of that, with the race unable, I fear, to have a slot later in the day. We have done 3 laps and the red flag is being shown. No news as to whether it will be restarted or not, but with the weather deteriorating and the standing water therefore increasing with the puddles filling up, the red flag is shown. And let's see whether the cars are brought down into the pit lane or stop on the grid. You can see how bad the rain is falling once more, and in fairness to the race director, whether he lets them go or whether he stops them, someone's going to complain, and probably it is better to be asked, why did you stop it, than why didn't you? And Sven Stopper is a very experienced race director. He looks after the DTM, the FIA Formula 3 European Championship, the ADAC GT and F4 series as well, and the Audi TT Cup, so he knows exactly what he's doing, and if he feels that it's not safe, then there really is no discussion, is there? So the cars will stop on the grid, and the race is stopped, as you know, because of the red flag having come out. Kang Ling, incidentally, stayed in the pit lane, didn't rejoin, but whether now there will be a restart and how long before we get there, we wait and see. The drivers slotting into their places on either side of the grid, but it is a race stop. So the red lights flash on the rear of the cars. The red lights glow over the pit straight. And I'm afraid to say that this is the weather that is forecast for the day. And although there was a brief respite for the DTM qualifying session, we had a Porsche race at about 9:10 this morning. And even that was twice interrupted with safety cars. Actually, it turned out to be a very good race because the rain meant that people had to gamble on tyre choice. And that produced lots of excitement as people pitted and had to fight their way back through. But I'm afraid now we just got to the point where it is so wet, and every time it rains it just fills up the puddles, that it's looking as though Formula 3 may not even start now. And that could be the last time the cars run. I don't think they can be put to the end of the day because of the nature of people having to get flights and broadcast times and the like as well. So the teams come out onto the grid, but it could be that the cars are held, and if the rain eases they'll be released again, but I can't sound terribly optimistic about it. You would not believe how good the weather has been for the last 2 days here. Lots of sunburnt people in shorts and t-shirts walking around, and today it is ghastly. So they have done 3 laps, at which point the red flag came out. Anything between 2 laps and 75% gives you half point, so notionally a result could now be given. And it could well be that that's all that we're going to get. The teams also await news. But at the moment, the information we have is purely red flag, nothing about a restart. But the rain is still falling. And within the 35 minutes of the time, the clock continues to tick away. Real shame for not just the teams, and of course for the fans, many of whom have paid very good money to come and watch today. Some have been here for the whole weekend because the campsites have been full and they have had some action to watch. But for the circuit as well, Red Bull Ring is a fabulous venue, and the people that run the place have worked so hard to make it not only look good but well organised, and it really is an excellent facility, and one of the track's biggest meetings of the year. It looks like it's in danger pretty much of being rained off now, because if it's too bad for Formula 3 and it was too bad earlier for the DTM warm-up, the only remaining activity save this is the DTM race later on, and even that now must be in jeopardy, I would have thought, if the conditions continue to be this bad. And it's not the rain, it's the standing water, I think, plus the visibility of the spray from a Formula 3 car. So there is Antonio Giovinazzi, who sits on the grid and just gets wetter and wetter and wetter as he waits for the decision to be made as whether they go or whether they don't. Mechanics sprinting up the pit lane, but there's not really very much that they can do now. The cars have had 3 full laps behind the safety car. They've now parked back on the grid, and the bedraggled fans, many of whom I think are very shortly going to knock this on the head and head for home. The only good thing is that you can take the dog for a walk while you wait. Damp dog. It's about as bedraggled as you can get. Even the Red Bull looks miserable in this weather. And the other thing to bear in mind is just behind it, that grey cloud is getting lower and lower and lower. And as we had proved in the DTM at Lausitzring last year, if the medical helicopter can't take off, then nothing happens at all. It's just about time for a selfie. And once you've done that, look back at the track, nothing happens there either. Love is a day out in the rain to watch motor racing. So, as the grid is formed, with that one gap, Kang Ling in the pit lane, and I think that car has probably much been abandoned now, the information we await as to the resumption or the abandonment of the race. But looking down onto the grid and looking to see whether there are any F3 Championship officials that have come to talk to the teams, not yet. But the other factor to bear in mind in all of this is the timetable and the fact that there's a DTM race with a live TV slot as well for German TV that needs to be adhered to. So, looking at some of the images from behind the safety car, Dorian Boccolacci there in the signature car, turning his way out of Rauch, but even at slow speed, huge amounts of spray. And the bedraggled fans, those in the VIP suites, are out in the elements, but not getting too wet. Michael Douglas here as a guest of Lance Stroll and family. And the opportunity to see Lance race has not really happened, has it? Not today, anyway. With those 3 laps behind the safety car and now this stoppage. Looking out from over the start and finish line, the rain is still falling. And the teams all on the grid, but for the moment, no more news. It's not that race officials don't want the race to happen, but they don't want it to happen in dangerous conditions. And as was proved earlier on in the day, when cars do go off here, and that grass now, just to make the point also, is going to be absolutely saturated. So if you get onto it, there's absolutely no adhesion. You'll just be a passenger and skate off into something rather more solid. So if it's a safety concern, then it just can't be a race to be allowed to run, can it? The bars and the catering outlets are doing a roaring trade, I tell you. When I made my way back up here a little while ago, emergency supplies were being brought in because there's nothing else to do apart from eat and drink at the moment. And the Red Bull Ring circuit staff hard at work. The track staff have been hard at work trying to sort out the standing water before the DTM qualifying session, including trying to build a bit of extra drainage, try and scrape some little trenches so that there was place for the water to run to. But everybody is determined to try and make this day happen. And there's a certain resilient spirit among the fans here. The Red Bull shop, which is at the bottom of the grandstand opposite the pits, sells pretty much everything. I imagine that waterproofs and hats are doing a roaring trade, whether or not there's much in the way of umbrellas. Haven't seen those on sale yet, but I'm sure they've found a supply of them from somewhere. And there's a very soggy doggy. Continues his walk. The teams continue to stand on the grid and await more news. There is absolutely nothing that they can do at the moment. There is no more news from race officials, but we've had 3 laps done. So 3 full laps. You can see the rain is still falling, but sooner or later I would fear that the decision has to be made, and that will be to either let them go again behind the safety car or just knock it on the head. But for as long as the rain falls, if standing water is the concern, then it won't get any better with the cars sitting on the grid, and therefore the decision will have to be made. And the timing screen has just reset itself at the end of 3 laps, which does make me think that that's where the result is going to be given. So I haven't yet had a message line that says no restart. We've had that for other activities this weekend, but I think the rain's getting worse again, and the timing screen, as I say, has reset at now the 3 lap mark. Now that could be that we're going to carry on after 3 laps, and that's the race order, or it could be that that's where the result will be formed from. More news as soon as we have it, but until the officials have made the decision, then there's not much we can tell you. Antonio Giovinazzi would be quite happy if this were knocked on the head, because then he'd get the points, even if they're only half points, for the win, and that would stretch the advantage a little over Felix Rosenqvist. Sergio Sette Camara for a notional 3rd place as things stand, having been on the podium at Spa earlier on in the year. Marcus Pommer, Lance Stroll and Charles Leclerc, the others within the top 6, the top 10 in order, rounded out by Jake Dennis, Alex Albon, George Russell and Callum Ilott. And with points for the top 10, they would, if we didn't get going again, be the scorers. So the grid is there. Siren sounds, but I was waiting to see whether that came with a message on the screen, and nothing appears. I think some people have now decided it's time to head for the dry. Even the photographers have given up on life. Full marks to the hardy cameramen for staying out there. And whether they are rewarded with any race images remains to be seen. So on the grid, teams await news. The rain continues to fall, and well, the only highlight is finding yourself on the big screens now, as the fans shelter, and the marshals shelter as well where they can. But very, very grim conditions. The rain itself is not bouncing off the road, but it's just heavy enough to keep topping up these puddles, and the standing water is the issue with these little rivulets running across the circuit. Some of it on that run up towards turn 2, just under the second Hankook gantry, is where that big accident happened in the Audi TT Cup race. And I tell you, there was bits of car as well as full cars all over the road. There was an engine fire. It was a monster accident, and straight away the race was stopped. The clear-up operation was going to take so long that there was no way that could restart. But it's now that low cloud, I would think, that's starting to be a concern as well, because if that drops much lower, then the medical helicopter will have an issue, and then you can't run at all. So a real shame, this, after what's been great weather for the last 2 days, and at a circuit that everybody seems to like coming to. The grandstands around turn 1, turn into and out of turn 1, up towards turn 2, halfway up the straight, give you a great vantage point. And because they are so high, and there's this amphitheatre feel, you can see lots of different bits of the circuit. Drivers making their way up to the race control building. In some cases, that might be to go and talk to the officials and say, really, this isn't on. In other cases, it might be for something as mundane as a pit stop. But the race officials, I'm sure, will be happy to listen to the drivers. But Antonio Giovinazzi would like to carry on if he can, but I can't see the race even having many more laps behind the safety car because of the need to run a DTM race later on. There's one team that's just taken all of its paraphernalia back into the pit lane. There's a second team doing likewise. So it could well be that they've now decided, well, there's no point being out here because we can't do anything. We don't need tyres, we don't need a new nose cone. But one or two drivers, Gustavo Menezes has been one that's been out of his car. He's getting back into it. Even if the race is abandoned, he'll have to drive it off the grid, so he might as well get back in. But for the moment, no news. Interesting that drivers are doing this, because of course what it does mean is they get back to a car with wet boots. Just trying to see whether there are many other empty cars. Felix Rosenqvist stays in his Prema Power team, Dallara. And the Swedish driver, who won all 3 races here, in fact, going back 2 years, is another man who wants the points. He knows how to win championships. And he sits on the grid, awaiting news, as everybody does, of a restart. But that cloud is getting lower. As I say, the rain itself is just sort of very heavy drizzle. It's not horrendously heavy rain, but it's just topping up the standing water that we've had. And the amount of running that we had, the DTM qualifying session, that was 20 minutes long, but even that was not without rain. So we've probably only had about 10 minutes, maybe 15 at the most, where the rain hasn't been falling. It means that this saturated track continues to be soaked, and that's a 6-minute countdown on the grid. The timing screens have got an 11.5-minute countdown to the end of the race. Now, is that 6 minutes to a restart? It could be. As I say, we are not having any other information on the timing screen's message line other than red flag, but another klaxon sounds. And 10 minutes, it says on the board. It's just come out over the grid. 10 minutes. So 10 minutes before the race, one assumes, gets back underway behind a safety car. And in doing that, so the timing screen has now reset at 4 laps, which is what we were on rather than what we had done. So some had done 4, some had done 3 when the red flag came out. 8 minutes now. It's a pretty rapid countdown, this, to get us back underway. So engines will fire up, I think, relatively soon. And then the cars will set off once more behind the safety car. The DTM race that follows is due to get underway at about 3:20. So as the clock ticks down to try and get things back underway, the race director operating short minutes here to fulfill a countdown. There's no one that's going to run out of any time. I mean, all they've done is just sit there with umbrellas, so they don't need the time to do any work particularly. They just want to get the race back underway, but a countdown has to be adhered to under the regulations. But if the minutes aren't quite to the second, then does it really matter? So looking down onto the grid, Felix Rosenqvist ready to go. Antonio Giovinazzi is ready as well. Miserable conditions for the drivers, of course, sitting out in the spray. Having to cope with the cars filling up with water. There's the problem of visibility as well if their visors start to steam up. And Antonio Giovinazzi gets ready. The restart coming up imminently. The safety car deployed message has come back up, so again they will start behind a safety car, follow it round, and if and when we are ready, we will either have the cars released or we will have a result. Anything less than 75%, half points. And the cars imminently to be released. 3 more minutes on that clock over the grid. Looking down onto the front there of Sergio Sette Camara's car for Motor Park. Good luck, he is wished. So it'll be a safety car start once more. And the drivers that have not yet done 4 laps will complete their 4th lap as they come across the timing line. Kang Ling is the one in the pit lane still. So imminently we'll get the race back underway for an indeterminate time, because the clock on the timing screen has got just under 8 minutes. So how long they're going to be given, we'll have to find out as the cars circulate. It could just be to the end of that allotted time, but the clock is carried on ticking rather than it being stopped. Normally the time is added on, so whatever they had left is run, but the clock's carried on ticking. However, race control have probably got enough to worry about at the moment. They'll worry about the length once they've got the cars moving again. So as the rain falls, the Red Bull Ring, a completely different feel to it today after being such a spectacular place for the last 2 days in the sunshine. It's now pretty imposing in the Austrian mountains. It is a very spectacular part of the world. It's a busy place for tourism, but on a day like today, I think the bars and restaurants and guest house will be the busiest rather than any outdoor activities, because it is proper horrible out there. It's not that cold. Again, if and when it were to stop raining, it might dry relatively quickly, but it is just now with the standing water in certain parts of the circuit. So I can't actually tell you that the rain has eased, and therefore why now is a good time to start rather than a few minutes ago. But start we seem to be doing. So you'd have thought that if the standing water was bad and it's carried on raining, it would be worse. But anyway, let's not be too childish about it. The cars are going to be released, and so this 24th round of the FIA Formula 3 European Championship will continue, albeit behind the safety car. And in a moment, then the race will get, such as it is, back underway. The grid is being cleared of all the engineers once more. At the 1 minute siren, the grid cleared, and they will make their way from the line, again in the 1-by-1 formation, queue up behind the safety car. The yellow flags are being waved, and the safety car on instruction will move away. And then, I hesitate to use the word race, the race will be underway again. So at the end of this final few seconds, we'll be in business. The timing screen clock has got 5.5 minutes left on it. So it could just be that we have a safety car period of 5 and a bit minutes, and that's that. But anyway, the green lights come on, so the race, in quotes, is back underway. Everybody makes their way off the grid. A rather slow getaway by Santino Ferrucci, meaning that Gustavo Menezes, his fellow American, has to slow rather than overtake him, because you can't overtake behind the safety car. And everybody now has completed their 4th lap, or everybody that's on the track, because they've come over the timing line. And so we start lap 5, with 5 more minutes still on the clock. But there's a part of me now anticipating at 5 more minutes a checkered flag to be shown behind the safety car. Up towards turn 2, and flying laps have been 2.5 minutes. And the last lap by Dorian Boccolacci was 21 minutes and 58 seconds, which means they've been sat on the grid for the best part of getting on for 20 minutes. So Alex Albon through in his signature car. You can see how slippery the track is, but in these conditions, drivers needing to be careful were this to be proper race conditions in safety car trim. All they can do is just follow the safety car around, and even then, as we've seen, people have had their dramas and been off the road. So those that are doing it properly will just follow at a safe pace. The FIA stewards will no doubt have been involved in the discussions about this, and of course with all the television pictures beamed into race control, they'll know what the state of the track is like. That corner you're looking at was where the concern was before the DTM qualifying session, and you saw some marks across the grass as Gustavo Menezes was sideways at turn 3. It was that section where the track staff were trying to dig some more trenches, if you like, to get the water away. So downhill they come from turn 5 through that little right-hand flick out of the Wirth corner and then up towards Rindt, and turn 7 is the Red Bull Mobile curve. So the safety car brings them round with 3 minutes on the clock. Down towards the Red Bull Mobile curve and then towards the timing line itself, and no suggestion that the cars are going to be released, of course. Safety car through, the Audi R8, with Antonio Giovinazzi then, now having done 5 laps, leading the way. I have to confess still to being puzzled as to why things were stopped and then allowed to restart, given that the weather has not improved. But anyway, perhaps the feeling is that if we just carry on behind the safety car and do a few more laps, we've got closer to a halfway mark. But it's still a bit of a puzzle because, as I say, the rain has carried on falling. It's not exactly improved. And we've not really been aware of anyone sweeping water out of the way. So in that respect, the reason for the interruption and then restarting is strange, and the red flag is being shown again. So I'm not sure really what that has gained us. 1 lap behind a safety car and another red flag. So the point of that was what exactly? The drivers have all, as far as I'm aware, gone over the timing line. I'm not aware that we've lost anybody. It could be that someone's gone off, granted, but we haven't seen that. So the red flag is shown, and this time, looking at where the officials are heading up the pit lane, I think it's going to be the end. There are people in the pit lane ready to receive the cars, and so red flag shown. Yes, the DMSB officials are preparing the Parc Fermé area at the bottom of the pit lane, and so another race that never was. Safety car, red flag, safety car, red flag. And that will be it, really. But it kind of gives you a half-point result, but a very unsatisfactory way of doing it, I'm afraid to say, in the conditions. But the purpose of starting it and then red flagging it after a lap beats me. But I'm sure that will become apparent. It may have been just to nudge the distance on a little bit, but there was certainly no suggestion that the weather was going to improve before the cars were released. So the red flag shown again, and the cars will this time, I think, yes, head down towards the pit lane. As I say, the Parc Fermé area is being constructed. The FIA's technical delegate for the championship, Bob Bassett, is ready to, if you like, impound the top 3 cars that he needs to inspect at the end of a race. Use the word advisedly. And therefore it will be Antonio Giovinazzi from Felix Rosenqvist, from Sergio Sette Camara, the notional top 3 finishers. But it's grid order, really, so the order based pretty much on qualifying. So down the pit road they come. The rain still falls, and as the safety car brings the field into the pit lane, the top 3 are those that are going to be whisked into Parc Fermé. So there's certainly no restarts. There's no chance. There's no suggestion. There's probably no interest, actually, from everybody that's now so wet. But what a great shame that after 2 days of glorious weather and some great racing, it all ends up in such a disappointing way, really, with so little activity. There is a rookie podium that is Lance Stroll, Charles Leclerc and Alex Albon, and drivers being congratulated for, well, driving around behind a safety car as much as getting a decent lap in qualifying. So half points it will be, and you could argue rather a waste of drivers' time, but at least it gets them to half points. But in these conditions, it's deemed by the officials to be too dangerous to run. I would suggest as well the rain is falling more heavily now, so in terms of the puddles of standing water, all it's doing is filling up again. But the 24th round of the FIA Formula 3 European Championship doesn't get a single proper racing lap in. Safety car to red flag, safety car to red flag. And the slow-mo images show the wet tyres provided by Hankook hard at work. But with the clock now having hit the zero as well, I mean, it wasn't even that it had got to the end of time. The race brought to an early close, and the cars in Parc Fermé being covered so they don't get full of water, as they have to stand in the fresh air, ready for the scrutineers to do the work. So that is the scene looking down onto the grid, and it's actually now the rain increasing in its intensity. It's probably about as bad as it was an hour ago now. It's heading that way, certainly, and the fans, I think, are starting to feel that they may not even get a DTM race in now, because if the weather was too bad for the warm-up session, then surely it's too bad for the race. But it's a real shame, this, a race meeting that could be pretty much abandoned because of the weather. And you would not believe how nice it has been for the last 2 days. I promise you, this is like a completely different part of the world. But the track is pretty much awash once more. The standing water and the rivers across the road will be getting worse and worse and worse. And there, the wet tyres, hard at work, even as the cars came down the pit lane. Look how much water there is there. So for the teams, a very frustrating day. For those drivers wanting to do some overtaking and to gain points, a very frustrating day. It almost seems wrong to have a podium, doesn't it, after a non-race? But podiums there will be, as the race winner is Antonio Giovinazzi, and it was worth doing that Banzai lap in qualifying, because little did he know on Friday afternoon that it would be a lap that won him a race. There, Felix Rosenqvist. Quite what you say to somebody after a race like that. Well, resignation all round, because they will know that it wasn't a proper race, and as the rain gets heavier and heavier and heavier and heavier, is that the last track activity even of the day? It's going to have to be very good in the next hour for a DTM race to happen. So the drivers will go through the weight check, the driver weight check, and then up towards the podium. There are two ceremonies, and the podium's being dressed accordingly. The first podium is, of course, for the overall drivers. The second is for the rookies. And that, therefore, was for George Russell. I'm hesitating because the timing screen has now removed the rookie drivers, as far as I can work out. It's now only showing the... Oh yes, the drivers that have come down the pit lane, and the rookies haven't crossed the beam in the pit lane because they were stopped up at Parc Fermé. So that's why there's now confusion on the timing screen, that not everybody's come over the timing line in the pit, so that's going to need sorting out. So the rookie podium was heading for, off the grid, Lance Stroll, Charles Leclerc and Alex Albon as those three drivers. But at the moment, they've not completed their sixth lap because they've not been able to drive far enough down the pit lane to cross the timing beam. So the teams take the equipment back to the paddock, and the Vega timekeepers are listening to me, I think, because they've now had another go at the timing screen and put the rookies back in. Bravo. So the result declared at 5 laps, which was the last lap before the red flag came out, and they had done that lap, so that's all good. Stroll, Leclerc, Albon, hooray. The top 3 rookies are now confirmed, but for the drivers, at the moment, rather reluctant to come out into the rain. They're all sheltering behind the podium opposite the very, very grumpy fans now, who've sat around for most of the day. It's now just gone 2:05 local time, and they've had a good Porsche race, and they've had a DTM qualifying session, and that pretty much is it, apart from lots of laps behind safety cars. It's not their fault, it's not the organisers' fault particularly that the weather has turned out like this, but erring on the side of caution, particularly with open-wheel, single-seat racing cars. No way that the race is going to be allowed to run. Now, there was talk of Michael Douglas being included in the presentations to hand over prizes at the end of the race. Now, whether he feels like getting out into the rain, we'll have to wait and see. I can see Hankook Tar personnel, and I can see Antonio Giovinazzi making his way forward onto the top step. Second place man Felix Rosenqvist ventures out as well. And somewhere there should be Sergio Sette Camara. The driver's not even being announced. Now the announcements will be made to bring them forward. And the top 3 drivers are on the podium. And the Italian national anthem for Antonio Giovinazzi. Antonio Giovinazzi then listens to the Italian national anthem, and now the prizes will be handed over. Just another thought about why it was restarted for a lap. I suspect it could have been that if conditions were looking a little bit more promising, as Helmut Marko, the Red Bull consultant, hands over the winner's trophy to Antonio Giovinazzi, if things were looking promising, you have to give it that 10-minute countdown. By the end of the 10 minutes, it could have been that things had worsened again. So it could be as simple as that. Carlin needs a rep on the podium, and the team is in fine voice as that requirement is now fulfilled. Hashtag wet beard. Right, for second place, Felix Rosenqvist receives his trophy, and in rather resigned fashion accepts it. There for third is Sergio Sette Camara from Brazil. Manfred Sandbichler from Hankook hands over the trophy and then beats a hasty retreat. Right, the drivers get together on the top step of the podium. As I say, the result effectively based on qualifying, given that they couldn't overtake behind the safety car. And a real shame, a race that never was, but promised so much. And potentially our third half-points race of the season. It means, for those that weren't able to do much in the way of racing in that, that they have lost less points, relatively, because only half were up for grabs. But having been soaking wet in the rain, time to get soaking wet with the Henkel Trocken as well. But the drivers on the podium, particularly Antonio Giovinazzi, can at least think, well, it's a win, and it's points, and it stretches his advantage in what remains a very competitive season. The next stop for the championship will be at Portimao. Surely it's going to be sunny in Portugal on the Algarve in the first weekend in September. The championship, as you look at the way they came across the line, Antonio Giovinazzi, the winner from Felix Rosenqvist, and then Sergio Sette Camara, the championship would have been going to Moscow, but the teams said, look, it's very expensive for us to go. We'd rather have a race somewhere else, and so a slot was found at Portimao, supporting the Blancpain Sprint Series in early September. Then they go to the Nürburgring. Always good weather there, isn't it? Late September. And Hockenheim. Never rains there either for the final 3 races in October. So the race result, with Kang Ling at the bottom of the order, having made that pit stop and then not being able to rejoin. But the cloud gets lower and lower and lower. Here at the Red Bull Ring, the visibility becomes more of a factor. For the Drivers' Championship then, it looks like this. Antonio Giovinazzi, even with only half points on offer, stretches the advantage a little over Felix Rosenqvist. Charles Leclerc third, then Jake Dennis, George Russell, Alex Albon sixth, ahead of Lance Stroll, Max Günther, Marcus Pommer and Mikkel Jensen to round out the top 10. It's Santino Ferrucci 11th, Brandon Maisano 12th, but he's now backed out of the series, we understand. He didn't race in race 2 nor race 3, having had a very disappointing start to his year, and the information from the media centre is that he's decided to walk away from the year rather than just the weekend, but hopefully he can be talked either into a return to Prema or a seat somewhere else maybe, because Brandon was very competitive in the French Formula 4 Championship. Be a shame to lose him. Lance Stroll takes another rookie victory. The Canadian driver has just made his way out onto the podium. The replays of Antonio Giovinazzi celebrating for Carlin, Prema and Motorpark, the top 3 teams represented overall at the end of round 24 of the FIA Formula 3 European Championship. Antonio Giovinazzi then takes his 5th victory of the season, and does so under the watchful eyes of famous actors and wet race fans here at the Red Bull Ring. Michael Douglas talking to Hans-Jürgen Abt. Behind him, members of the ITR board, Walter Mertens, Hans-Werner Aufrecht, and the rookie drivers currently on the podium, with Lance Stroll taking his victory, Charles Leclerc and Alex Albon being the other 2 drivers on that rookie podium. So a race badly affected by the horrendous weather conditions that Austria is coming to cope with, and it's apparently all over the country today, rain everywhere. But the forecast is that early evening, great, it's going to ease off a bit and become dry, but so bad is it that there's now limited optimism, I think, for the DTM race to come later on in the day. So we've had the rookie drivers on the podium. Say Lance Stroll taking that rookie class victory. And the drivers getting themselves together on the podium in that rookie competition. Next stop, the Dry of Portimao from a wet Red Bull Ring. Bye for now.